oral history interview with the Reverend Frank Bulloch, class of 1936, conducted by Marilyn Summers on August the 20th, 1996, at Mr. Bulloch's home in Atlanta, Georgia. The subject of the interview is Mr. Bulloch's life and student life at Georgia Tech. You asked me to call you Frank, and Frank, I thank you on behalf of the students and myself for allowing us to come to your home. And we're looking forward to hearing your story. So I always say begin at the beginning.
Okay, I was born on West B Street at 10th Street in Atlanta.
So you're a genuine native.
And it was that was in 1915, as I mentioned to you earlier, I think. Then I lived there with my parents until I was about 6 years old. Then my father was transferred up north, first to Jackson, Tennessee, and then up to Murfreesboro, Illinois. And I stayed there and went all the way through grammar school and high school in Murfreesboro, Illinois. And then when I got ready to go to college, I went 1 year to a local college in that area up there in Illinois. It was called Southern Illinois or something at that time. And I went for 1 year there, and then I transferred to Georgia Tech.
Now, why did you do that?
Well, because I'd always had an ambition to become an engineer, and especially electrical engineer.
And had you always had an ambition to go to Georgia Tech, or what made you come back there?
I'd always had an ambition to go to Georgia Tech because I came from Atlanta, and that was the place I thought of when I thought of engineering. So
even though you were up there with the Yankees, you didn't want to go to a Yankee school. You were ready to come back, huh?
It was bad enough to have to live up there without having.
You knew you were coming back to Georgia Tech.
That's it.
So you came in as a transfer student.
In effect, yes. Now, they spent the last 3 years at Georgia Tech.
And so what year did you actually come to Tech then?
It must have been, let's see, it would have been 32 if I'd come directly.
So it
was 33.
Yeah. Those were kind of tough times.
They were very tough times. My father was very fortunate. He had a job. He was a superintendent on a railroad and had a job all the way through. Had a little bit of salary cuts now and then, but we did manage to
He managed to stay employed. Well, how do you feel about you coming back down here to Tech?
How did I feel about it?
How did your dad feel about it?
Oh, he thought it was great. Yeah, he was highly in favor of it. So was my whole family were in favor of it. Did
you still have family living in the Atlanta area? Or?
Yes, I had primarily an aunt and uncle who lived here, and I'd known them very well over the years. In fact, we'd spent a lot of time with them before I left here, and so I felt very much at home coming back. Of course, I lived at Georgia Tech, but my uncle and aunt lived out in Buckhead, right off Peachtree Road, and I spent some time with them too.
So you had a family feel then?
Yeah, and my family by that time had moved back to Meridian, Mississippi. My own family. So when I lived in Atlanta, I could go over to Meridian and visit with them, especially in the summertime or at vacation time and so on.
What was it like to come to Georgia Tech in 1933?
Well, it was interesting. So much simpler than it is now, and a lot less students. And I lived, as I said, at 129 North Avenue. That's just a couple of doors from the stadium over there.
So that was your fraternity house?
That was my fraternity house. I always did fraternity house because I was a sophomore by the time I came.
So you didn't have to do any time in the dorms?
That's correct.
What was the fraternity like?
Well, it was, we had a lot of activities, of course, of one kind or another. What I remember is that we really basically had a very good time together. We also found time to study, of course, but we had a lot of parties, dances and things like that we sponsored. And a lot of things I remember during that time, the old, what do you call them, the big bands were coming to Georgia Tech at that time, like Kaiser and...
In the 30s they were
coming? In the
coming.
30s they were coming. And some of the others that you may not remember, but...
Dancing was really a great social pastime, wasn't it? It was very popular in those days.
Well, it was very popular, and ballroom dancing, and of course the big dances were sponsored by Georgia Tech, but the Interfraternity Council or somebody, I don't know who really put them on, but there were other smaller things that the fraternities had parties that they had.
Were you a good dancer?
Okay. I had quite a bit of experience because I'd learned early on to dance, and so I enjoyed that.
And where did the girls come from to dance with?
Well, they were Atlanta girls. I dated the girls here in Atlanta, and just girls that I'd met in different places. Some of them I met at the fraternity house and started dating them, and others around town, but they were all Atlanta girls.
Nobody really had any money in those days, did they?
No, they didn't. I remember I had $50 a month to do everything with,
and you were probably better off than some.
Than some. Cigarettes ran a little lower sometimes at the you know, at the end of the month or whenever it was. But we managed very well. I certainly didn't starve to death.
Did you think of it as a happy time?
Very happy time, and I always paid my board bill first. And then if I ran out of cigarettes, I just ran out of cigarettes.
But you had a place to lay your head.
Or as we used to say, we'd shoot ducks, meaning we'd find some cigarettes that were around.
Dancing was primarily the social life, but did you go to the movies and things like that too?
To some extent. We used to go to the Fox Theater was up there at that time, and of course the ones downtown, which are Lowe's and others are no longer there now. But I guess the dancing and dates, of course, on weekends. We used to pool our money or save up our money to rent automobiles, because that's about the only way you could.
Oh, I heard about that before.
Yeah.
Community auto.
Community auto, and that was pretty essential if you were going to go pick up your date.
Did you not use the trolley cars?
Well, as little as possible. we used to walk to town to save a nickel on the car fare. That's how affluent we were at that time.
So every nickel counted. Huh?
Every nickel counted.
What was it like in the classroom?
Well, in general, we had rather small classes, especially when I got into electrical engineering, in the junior and senior year. Before that, some of the classes were relatively large. Like I remember a physics class, for example, we had I must have had 100 and some odd people in it, and it was sort of in an assembly room rather than a classroom. But otherwise, the classes, as I say, were relatively small, and the math classes were small.
Having come from another school somewhere else, was Georgia Tech easy for you or hard for you?
It was tougher.
It was tougher?
Yeah, I remember I was doing fairly well in school. I always did well in high school. I'm talking about grade-wise now. And at the school up there, I just sort of drifted. I didn't have any real trouble. I made pretty good grades. When I came to Georgia Tech the first semester, I made 3 C's and 3 D's. I said, boy, I better get off my duff and do a little bit better.
You knew you had to apply yourself then.
So toward the end, my grades improved considerably. I even made some, what they used in those days, double A's, I made a few of those. And so by the time I'd gotten into the engineering department. So that I didn't. 3 C's and 3 D's is not total failure. I mean, it's
not at Georgia Tech.
No, but it can stand a little improvement.
It gives you a little scare that you have to pay attention. Huh?
It sort of encouraged me to do a little better.
Did you ever think you were not in the right place, or did it always feel good?
Well, I think it never occurred to me that I was in the wrong place when I went to Georgia Tech.
So when you didn't do well, you knew it meant you had to buckle down. Then is that it?
I had to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember any of your professors at all?
Yeah, I remember a number of them, but some of them I might even have trouble recalling all their names. But I remember a fellow named D.P. Savant, who ended up being the head of the electrical engineering school over there. He was a professor when I got there. In fact, he may have been, I don't think he was ever the head of it while I was there, but he was later. A fellow named Fitzgerald, I think, was the head of it before that. And there were a lot of professors, of course, that I had something to do with.
Mm-hmm. What was Savant like?
Well, Savant was an interesting fellow. He was a very smart man, of course. And I remember one instant, maybe that's the reason I was leading into Savant, but I was taking some electrical engineering course, and we had an exam one morning, or a test, you know, not a final exam, but a test. And lo and behold, I slept through the thing. And so later in the morning, later in the day, I went over and see Professor Savant. I said, Professor, I just slept through the class, you know. So he pulls out his grade book. He said, well, you're doing pretty well, Frank. Just don't worry about it.
Wow. Weren't you surprised at that?
Yeah, that was unusual.
You must have been doing very well.
Well, I was doing well in that course, I think, yeah.
How could you sleep through a test?
Well, it's easy. I don't know,
If you're tired enough, it's easy, huh?
Yeah, I guess I didn't have an alarm clock. I was in a fraternity.
Oh, you hadn't even come for it, you mean? I thought you meant you were in the classroom sleeping.
No, I wasn't sleeping in the classroom. I just hadn't gotten out of bed yet.
Oh, I can understand how you could do that.
Yeah, you can understand that.
That part I understand. That.
I thought that was right interesting.
Well, that's very kind of him.
Yes, it was.
Most of those professors are not famous for having been kind. They were famous for being hard.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting to me. I remember that very well to this date, you know, because he was not required to do that. But anyway, that I've always remembered that. Another thing I remember over there, not as far as the professors are concerned, but I was up on the balcony at the fraternity house on sort of kind of a roof, where you could stand, you know, out and look out over North Avenue. And one day we were standing out there, two or three of us talking, and President Roosevelt came by in an open automobile, and we thought that was
pretty interesting.
Really a great event. Yeah.
Did you had a good bird's eye view of him then from up there?
I sure did.
That must have been when he came to dedicate Techwood Homes, probably.
It could be.
Yeah.
It was about 1930. Well, who knows? 34 or 5.
35, 36, something like. I think it was in 35, maybe they were.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
God, you know the history. Don't you?
So you were one of the eyewitnesses to that, huh? Did you go over to Grant Field and listen to him talk?
I don't think I did that. I didn't go that far.
But you were happy to see him from upstairs.
Happy to see him upstairs.
Yeah. Do you remember ever taking part in any athletic activities, like going to football games or basketball or anything like that?
Well, of course, I went to almost all the football games. I suppose I went to all of them, really. And I never did go to any place out of town, like Athens or any place like that.
Just to home games?
I deny everything categorically. I didn't go to Athens.
There's a reason for that, I bet.
Well, you just didn't go to, you know, the University of Georgia wasn't the most popular institution in the place. They may have changed now, I don't know, but anyway, I never did go out of town, primarily because we didn't have any money to travel with. At least I didn't. Yeah.
When you came in as a second-year student, you missed the thrill of having to wear a rat cap, so you didn't have to be a rat.
I didn't have a rat cap, but I did participate in the initiation at the fraternity. See, they didn't pass that over because I was a sophomore.
Oh, so they had some sort of a ritual for you?
Well, it kind of, I went through the freshman routine, which...
Even though you were already past that phase, huh?
Right. And it was in the fraternity at that time. It was not really severe, but I mean, we had some things to go through.
Do you remember any clubs or groups you might have belonged to on the campus?
I didn't. I was not a member of very many things in terms of that kind of organization or anything. I was trying to remember if I really did anything like that. I was mostly in the fraternity. I was an officer in the fraternity and things like that.
Did you ever hold a job? Did you have to work while you were in school?
Never held a job.
So you got to enjoy your college days that way then?
Pretty much, yeah. I sure did.
So
even on $50 a month.
Well, it was a princely sum.
It wasn't too bad in those days.
We'll let time pass here a little bit. Overall, do you remember any of your classmates at that time? Did you make good friends while you were there?
Yeah, primarily the people in the fraternity, although I did know some others around the campus. One person was Jimmy Slocum, who played football for Georgia Tech. I don't know out of your history you remember that or not, but he was there at about the same time I was. I think he might have been a year ahead of me. But I've kept up with Jim. In fact, I worked with him at the Link Belt Company in Atlanta at one time. And he met his wife there, and they were married, and, you know, we just sort of had a relationship. And not too long ago, he had his wife died, and I had the funeral for his wife, which was a sort of meaningful thing after many years, you know.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And there were some others. There was a fellow named Turpin, who was the treasurer of the fraternity, and another one named Jeff Lumpkin, who was a very outstanding student, always had straight A's. Some people are that way. And I can think about a number of others. But so there were some brothers named Martin who came from Alabama. We didn't hold that against them.
You didn't.
And
so overall, there were a lot of good friends to be had there then. It was
yeah,
real friendly environment for you.
I could mention some other names, but they, you know, I don't guess we want to go too many names.
But you've stayed friends with these people off and on ever since over the years, huh?
Well, yeah, many of them I have, and I've continued to go to the reunions, you know, the class reunions. And I did the planning for the 50th reunion, so I kept me in contact with a lot of people that way. Some of whom I didn't know as well as others from the class in general. But I sort of kept up with people that way.
Well, that's wonderful to be able to have that attachment, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
After all the years. Can you think of any things that were around the campus that particularly come to your mind, like little hangouts or places you went to eat?
Well, yeah.
Of course, the Varsity was there.
Now, you won't rat on me, will you?
I won't rat on you. You go ahead and tell me.
Well, no, I'm just joking. They had a beer joint right up the street. It was in an old house, about 3 or 4 doors from the ATO house, and we used to drop in there occasionally.
What was the name of it?
Say once a night.
Say once a night. Pretty occasional. What was the name of it?
I don't even remember now.
Oh, you can't remember it?
No.
Was it run as a private establishment? You mean in a house, or?
Yeah, it was in an old house, but it was run as a restaurant, and they served beer and other things like that. That's all they could serve then, as I remember it.
They served the Georgia Tech community.
That's right. If you wanted different kind of drinks, different kind of alcohol, you ordered on the telephone.
You called somebody?
Yeah, bootleggers.
And that what they do, deliver to you?
Yep.
Did they really?
Oh yeah.
We just heard about that. We didn't know that was for real.
That's right.
That was for real. You remember that?
It was something like $5 a bottle at that time. That was a pint. See?
That was pretty expensive.
Fairly, but they did have to deliver it, and it was illegal.
Well, sure it was. But you guys were all pretty risk takers, huh?
Well, in a sense, you could say that. Nobody ever bothered anybody about ordering the alcohol, but I remember Hemlock 5000 or Jackson 2525 with the telephone number.
You could almost make a song out of that.
That's right. They had the simple telephone numbers in those days.
So people would remember and call, huh?
That's right.
The Varsity, that had begun.
Oh, yes. And I used to, stop there reasonably often. Of course, there was no freeway in there then, so you just walked up the street. I got to know Mr. Gory fairly well. I forget his first name now. Frank Gory, yeah. Yeah, I got the same name.
You think you'd have remembered that one, huh? But you probably called him Mr. Gory.
Well, not really.
No?
No, because he wasn't very old at that time, of course. He lived for many years after that. Even after I got in the ministry, I used to stop by there and get lunch when I'd go hospital calling downtown. And we used to visit some, and he would ask me to come in his office and have lunch with him. And so he was a very nice gentleman.
Was he? We've been told that he was good to float loans, that he would frequently lend tech students money.
Fortunately, I never did have to.
You didn't have to borrow from him, huh?
No, but he was very pleasant, and I enjoyed visiting with him in the later years that way. It's not too long after that he died. I can't remember exactly when that was, but it was 1980s probably or something like that. Well, 1970s would be closer, I guess.
And almost everybody did go there.
A lot of
from
them
school.
went.
Yeah.
I think most everybody went to the varsity.
Yeah. Where else would you go if you wanted to get a meal?
At the right price.
At the right price.
You used to be able to eat dinner there for about a quarter. You know, that was enough to buy food and a nickel for a tip.
Oh, you had to tip.
Well, if you went in the where drive-in. Sure.
Was Flossie there in those days? That
I think
famous
so.
car hop?
Yeah. And there were some others. They were a lot of them were well known in Atlanta.
Now it turned into being quite a tradition in Atlanta to this day.
Yep,
going
that's
to
right.
Varsity.
It's a unique place, I think.
Can you remember any other spaces that tech students used to go to, places you hung out?
Let me see. We usually stayed fairly close around the campus.
Did you?
Except when we went on dates or something, and you know, we had drive-in movies in those days. If you rented a car, well, you know, it would give you an opportunity to have a date in the drive-in.
They had drive-in movies?
Oh yeah.
I didn't even know they had them in those days.
Some of them were over on, one of them was, in particular, was over on Piedmont, somewhere along there. I can't remember exactly where that thing was.
Near the park?
Oh yeah.
So you could, if you rented a car, you could get a date and go to the drive-in. I thought the drive-ins didn't come till much later than that.
No, that was...
You remember that, huh?
Oh yeah, I do remember it.
Do you remember your graduation?
Well, actually, I never did go to the graduation because I had to go back and complete a couple of classes after the time in the summer, that summer. So I just let the graduation happen, and they sent me the
you got it in the mail?
diploma. Yeah.
Well, your mom and daddy didn't get to come and cheer you on in your robes then?
That's right. They didn't do it. They didn't get to do it.
Well, what happened when you graduated?
You mean after that?
Yeah, what happened to you? Graduation came. You came back and took 2 classes, and then what did you do?
Well, yeah, I finished that summer, and then I had a job. In those days, people like Westinghouse and General Electric were paying $100 a month for graduate engineers. So I'd only doubled the amount I was living on in school, you know. But I didn't take a job with either one of them. I took a brief temporary job with an oil company out in Texas. I went out to a little town called Edna, Texas, and they were doing a thing they called torsion balance. That won't mean anything to you, but it was a way to determine where oil was located. In other words, you'd put these things around on the ground, and then they would make some moves to indicate there was oil in that area, you know. And I was with them for a little while, and then I came back to Atlanta and had another temporary job here, and then I went to work for Link Bell Company about 6 months after I graduated or finished my.
What company was that?
Link Bell.
Link Bell. Yeah. And what did you do for them?
I was an engineer with them, and I did estimates, drawings, different things like that. Finally, after some period of time, I became the head of the department of estimating department there in Atlanta, and we prepared estimates for industrial firms related to the conveying, elevating, power transmission machinery, and that kind of thing. And I worked in Atlanta for about, let's see, until 1950, I guess. Well, there was another little interlude before that. I left Link Bell Company in 1947, I think it was, or 48, briefly. Another gentleman and I that I knew went into a business. It was a 5 and 10 cent store business. We ended up owning 5 stores over in Alabama.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then
an engineer goes retail.
An engineer goes retail. Then I went back. After that, I did that for a while, and I decided that I would go back to engineering. The business wasn't doing too well. Matter of fact, we got out beyond our capital, which sometimes happens when you get a new business. And we were expanding too rapidly. So we sold the stores, and I went back to the Link Bell Company. which they were willing for me to do. I was pleased about that. And then I worked a little bit longer in Atlanta, maybe a year or two longer. And in 1950, they sent me to Chicago, because they had a big operations in Chicago. And I was the was a chief, I guess, I don't know what the title was engineering estimating department. I had about 25 engineers that worked with me or for me, whichever word is proper. And had a good time doing that. It was an interesting occupation.
What was the name of your department stores, or your little 5 and 10 stores? What did you call them?
They were the Walker 5 and 10 cent stores. Well, it was Walker Bulloch, really.
Ah, so you were going to try and compete with Woolworth and
Others like that. All the towns we were in, Woolworth was not.
You were little towns then.
Like Heflin, Pell City, Ashland.
What happened to the chain?
Well, we
sold it, but did it stay on? Or?
They operated it for a while after that. I think it later just
disappeared.
Disappeared, yeah. Somebody bought it and operated it for a period of time.
So all told, you were with Link Bell then for 15 years, something like that?
More like that, probably.
Yeah. Over this period of time, did you get married, start a family? What was going on with
the marriage part, let's go back and pick that up.
Yeah, I think you better go back and pick that up. Where did Mrs. Bulloch come into this?
Well, in 1939, I was married. And we were married for 44 years. She died in 1984.
I see.
So, and in the course of that time, we had 3 children.
Okay, now when you got married in 1939, Mrs. Bulloch then was an Atlanta person?
No, she was from Florida.
Oh,
As a matter of fact, her father was in the orange business in a town called Citra, Florida.
Well, how did you run into her then?
Well, she was up here visiting with her sister who lived in Atlanta on Ponce de Leon, and I met her through a mutual friend of mine and hers. You know, the man knew somebody that knew them. Uh-huh. So we met, and we were married about 6 months later, I think. I talked her into it.
Good for you. And then you had 3 children.
3 children.
Tell us about that.
All right, 3 children. I had a girl first. She's now 54 years old.
She doesn't want you to tell us that, you know.
I take that back. Will you cut the sound?
Tell us her name.
Her name is Linda.
Okay.
And then I had a son, Frank.
Frank.
And he was 3 years younger.
Uh-huh.
And then 8 years later, we had another daughter.
And her name is?
Her name is Betsy, and she lives in Atlanta. Her husband is a professor at Emory.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, Frank, we got to 1950, and you're up in Chicago. Tell us what happened next.
Okay. Well, Rose and I had 2 children, the first 2 children by that time, before I went to Chicago. My first 2 children were born in Atlanta while I was working with the Lake Bell Company here. And then we went up there and had a good time in Chicago. Really, it was a very, very nice community we lived in. It was very nice. We enjoyed it. But that's when we had the 3rd child. That's Betsy, right? And the fact of the matter is, she was born about let me think now, about 2 weeks before I left to go to the seminary.
So you had made up your mind you were going to go to the seminary. Right. That was a big decision to make, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And your family supported you in that?
Well, my wife did support me in it. She was not enthusiastic, let's put it that way. She enjoyed being an engineer's wife, I think. In fact, I know she did. But we finally decided together maybe if I was going to do it, this was the time to do it.
What were you thinking of? Had you been thinking about it for a long time?
Quite a long time. It just had grown on me that maybe that was something that I needed to do.
You felt a strong call for that? Did you know where you were going to go?
You mean?
As to what seminary you were going to go to?
Well, not when I first started thinking about it, but later. I would have gone to Savant, of course, because that's the one that I was most familiar with. But they were having some big-time upheavals about admitting black students to the seminary at that time. And all the faculty resigned over the issue. Of course, they were supporting the admission. The trustees were a little bit reluctant. And so the whole faculty resigned at one time. So the bishop of Mississippi, which is where I was going into the ministry from, because my family lived over there at that time. And he decided it wouldn't be a good idea to go to Sewanee without a faculty.
Yeah, probably not.
So there was a new seminary starting in Austin. So that's when I went to Austin, Texas, and went to the seminary for 3 years. And then...
where did your family go while you were in the seminary?
They were with me.
Oh, they came right with you?
Absolutely. We even had a house out there.
How does one support oneself when one's in the seminary?
Well, I had some support from one of the parishes in Mississippi, the rector, whom I knew very well. Some support from that. We had some funds that we had
saved up
ourselves. A very interesting thing to me, the Lake Belt Company, I had indicated I was going to resign and go to the seminary. They knew about that. In September, I left to go to the seminary in September of 1953. And my compensation had been set up so that I was making a salary plus 40% bonus at the end of the year. In other words, a cash bonus, which was lovely. But of course, I left and I went down to Austin, which started the seminary. In January, I got a check from my bonus. That is the 40%.
So that was a nice big thing you could live on.
Well, it helped.
I'm sure it helped.
And I'm not sure how many companies would do that nowadays.
I'm not sure how many either. That was really extraordinary. They supported you that way.
Yeah. So the relationship with corporations is different now from what it was then, I think, because you ordinarily thought that you would stay with the corporation. Under most circumstances, you would stay with the corporation and
until you retired.
Until you retired, and they thought the same way. So it was a different climate. Now I don't, it's.
Well, what you did was very unusual. It was nice that they supported you with that.
Right, they did.
And so you were in seminary for 3 years.
Right.
And then what happened?
Then I came out and I went to a little church in Mississippi because I'd gone in from Mississippi because my family was located there, and I knew a lot of people in that area. So I went to seminary from Mississippi. My first parish or little church was over in Indianola, Mississippi. I'm sure you want to make a note of that.
Indianola.
Indianola, Mississippi. That's halfway between Greenville and Greenwood, Mississippi. Indianola has some distinctions, one of which is being the birthplace of the White Citizens Councils. You don't remember them, do you?
No, I can't say that.
It's somewhat modified version of the Ku Klux Klan.
I was thinking, is he saying that? That's what you're saying, yeah.
That's right.
It was very much the seat of hostility during the Civil War. A lot of resistance there.
Resistance, yeah.
You had your work cut out for you, didn't you?
Well, yeah, and of course I knew all the people in the congregation. One or two of them were members of the White Citizens Council. But we understood each other. They expected the Episcopal priest to be some kind of nut. You know? So,
and did you meet their expectations?
I did.
You did. You were some kind of a nut.
I succeeded in that. And anyway, we had a very good time in Indianola. It was a nice town for us to live in. I never encountered any problems about the other thing. Of course, they knew where I stood about it. You know, I was automatically a member of the country club in Indianola. They offered that to all the clergymen in town. But unfortunately, the Baptists and Methodists in particular were not able to take advantage of that because their members drank at the country club.
So they weren't allowed to be there.
Right, something like that.
But with your good Georgia Tech training, it didn't matter, did it?
Well, they found it to be embarrassing because they were the preacher was watching them. And they were supposed to be drinking. They didn't work too well, but I had a good time out there, and they were really very lovely people there. A lot of them were planters, of course, the cotton plantation people, well educated. Many of them had gone to, northern universities, Harvard, Yale, all around, because they had money. when the years were good.
Uh-huh. And how long did you stay there?
3 years.
Oh, okay. And what came next?
What came next was the Cathedral of St. Philip.
Oh, you came right back to Atlanta.
That's correct.
How interesting.
They contacted me, and we worked out an arrangement where I would come back over here. And
You were home again.
home again. And then we bought a house. And
Really very close to right where you had started out, right where you had been born then. You were right back.
Right back.
In the heart of Atlanta.
You got it. And we bought a house, came back and bought a house. And I worked on the staff there for 21 years then until, that was 1959. And I worked for 21 years till 1980.
You saw a lot of changes in Atlanta in that time, didn't you?
There were quite a few, yeah, I would say. It was an interesting place to work. Very large congregation, as I'm sure you're aware. And very challenging type ministry.
A beautiful structure.
Yeah. Then I retired, and I've had some interesting activities since I retired as well. So I don't know how much time you've got.
Well, I want you to tell us about them, definitely.
Okay, well, sometime after I retired from...
Before you retired, when you were at St. Philip's, can you remember any significant historical things that took place during that time that you were an observer to what was going on here?
Well, there were numerous things that happened during that time. I remember Prince Charles came once and visited at the cathedral, and
do you remember the integration process at Georgia Tech?
Not very much, because my contact wasn't very strong. I had more knowledge about, say, Lovett School or someplace like that, which was related to the cathedral and to the Episcopal Church, as you probably knew. Mm-hmm. They survived, but there was a lot of upheaval and turmoil.
It went so well at Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
It went so well. There were no problems, probably because Dr. Harrison had it so well plotted out, but I just wondered if you had any observations about that.
No, I just was not connected with it. I wasn't plugged in, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of things that happened at the cathedral, of course. It's hard for me to remember all of them in specifics right now, but
it was a good time.
Good ministry, good time.
Good time.
21 years. That shows you can fool some of the people some of the time.
You can fool all the people, huh?
More or less. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, what happened with your family during that period of time? The kids had to have grown up.
That's right.
They went to school here in Atlanta.
Well, yeah. Now my son went to Emory, and my daughter went. I'm talking the older son went to Emory, and my older daughter went to Agnes Scott.
Okay, so they did the Atlanta thing.
Yeah. And then my younger daughter went to various schools around, ending up at the University of Georgia. You won't let that get out, will you?
We'll keep it a secret.
And she ended up at Georgia State and did some work down there too. I guess she was my outstanding student. She always made magna cum laude or summa cum laude.
She was one of those, huh?
Chip off the old block, as I'm sure you can see.
She probably never brought back 2 C's and 2 D's. Now, come on.
Not that I remember. Not that she shared with me, anyway.
I'm sure. So, and what else happened to you then?
Well, then after that, after I retired, I became rather active in a club up at Lake Lanier. I had started before I retired, and it's the University Yacht Club, which is right across from Holiday Marina. I don't know whether you're familiar with the lake or not.
Just a little bit, enough to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, I was appointed chaplain up there in 1978. That was, as you know, a little before I retired. And I've had that ministry, particularly in the summertime, ever since. It's been very interesting.
To this day?
To this day.
You still go up for the summer? Wonderful.
I have a houseboat. You don't have to cut the grass on a houseboat.
No, you don't.
The
What's the name of your houseboat?
what is the name of it? Amen.
Man, that's appropriate, isn't it?
But anyway, we've had, matter of fact, about 3 years ago, they built a chapel up there at the University Yacht Club, which is an outdoor chapel. You can see down the lake about 10 miles. Beautifully built and all, and they named it Bulloch Chapel.
Isn't that nice?
So I asked my Roman Catholic friends to call me St. Francis.
I think they should. You have a church named after you.
Yep.
How very nice.
That again shows you can fool some of the people some of the time.
How very nice. And so what else happened with your life? So you occupy yourself in the summers going up there. What do you do in the wintertime?
Well, I always seem to find some activity to get involved with. I've been rather active here at Foxcroft because there are 402 units in this community, which makes it a pretty large.
Is this a retirement community?
No, it's not. It's a condominium.
Just a condominium.
There are people of all ages and with families and some older people, but it's not primarily a retirement community. I lived in a retirement community for a while, about the time my wife died, but when I married again, we got to get into that too.
Oh, okay. Well, let's back up. When was this now?
I was married. My first wife died in 1984, and I was married again in 1985 to a person that I'd known a long time. My wife had known a long time. We did carpools together and things like that. So I didn't have to go out and court another young girl. I'd done that before. So.
You married a good friend instead.
Good friend instead.
Yeah. And that's Mary?
That's Mary.
Yes.
And Mary and I have been married about 11 and a half years now. Or, well, around that, yeah.
So she keeps you out of trouble.
That's true.
And keeps you busy in the winter.
At least she helps.
She helps. And how are the children all doing?
Well, they seem to be doing very well. Two of them live in Atlanta, and the other one lives at Commerce, which is only
pretty close.
What, 50 or 60 miles up the road, I guess.
And so do we have grandchildren?
Yeah, my daughter, Betsy, the youngest daughter, has most of the grandchildren. She has three daughters. They range in age from about 10 to about 16. And they live out near Emory.
So that's very close. You get to see them. You have good family life.
And my son lives in Atlanta. He married a girl with two children who are now close to 20 in that that area, that vicinity. And then my other daughter's never married. So what she did, she was married for a brief period at one time, but she's not married now.
We have to let time pass again.
Yeah, she had bells ringing on us.
It's almost like a ship's bell.
It is a ship's bell.
That's because that's what it is, huh?
That's what it is.
It sounds like one. Were you ever a sailor before you got involved with University Yacht Club?
No, I never was. We have a houseboat up there, but I've never done any sailing.
Haven't been on the high seas?
Not on the high seas. I deny everything.
You deny it all?
Never been on it.
Where did you get the name University Yacht?
All right. Well, the University Yacht Club was founded about 1951, I guess, or somewhere in there, about the time the Lake Lanier was
created.
Opened, yeah, created. And the basis on which they did it was that the members had to be students of a college or university.
Oh,
they have to have some college or university background.
Ah.
That's where they got the name.
So it's non-specific. It can be any university.
It can be any of them, that's right.
Okay. A little bit elitist then. You weren't taking it anybody who didn't have an education, right?
Well, that's the way they, I'm not clear yet on how well educated some. But
you've had a very, very interesting life, haven't you?
I sure have.
You've done.
I wouldn't change a thing.
Wouldn't change a thing?
No.
Done lots of interesting things?
Yep.
And still always come back to Atlanta?
No regrets.
That's a wonderful thing to be able to say, isn't it?
Well, there are things about which I could have regrets, I guess, but I don't.
You know, I can't imagine what it would be in thinking back of all this.
The Lord done forgiven me.
He did, indeed. It was a happy life. You've had a very happy life. Lucky.
Yeah, and very fortunate. Of course, there have been some stresses and strains, but
Always. We wouldn't know you were alive if there weren't some stresses and strains, right?
of course you never have any.
I know what it is to be alive. Stresses and strains.
Let's put it
there.
that way.
Yeah. Yeah. But overall, you've had such a rich variety of experiences.
Well, that's true. There's no doubt about that. I've been into
It hasn't been boring at all, has it?
no time.
No time. Busy people always say that kind of thing. No time to be bored. Mm-hmm. You look back at Georgia Tech as a happy time? Happy
time. Sure do. We had a good time over there, and just a good time to go to school there.
You're going to keep coming to reunions?
Oh, absolutely. I'm coming to the 60th this time. You did know this was the big 6-0?
I did. Mr. Keitel told me when I talked to him. You know, he's busy making things ready for it. So, Frank, tell us a little bit about some of your extracurricular activities, some of the things you do in the community.
Well, I've had a long association with the Buckhead Lions Club, and that's been very meaningful to me. I'm the chaplain of that club, and we have a good time. We meet up here in Buckhead, and it's just a lot of nice people in it, a lot of nice men. They haven't invited women yet. But
oh, they haven't?
No.
Oh, this is one of those.
We're working on it.
This is one of those last stands there, huh?
Last stand, that's right.
And you convene the meetings?
I don't convene the meetings, but I have an opening prayer, and then oftentimes I let them have a little joke. You know,
I bet you do.
We got to have a little fun.
You got to have some fun. That's right. What about some of the other groups are you associated with?
Well, that's the primary one in the community because, of course, we go to church.
You mentioned that you were active here in the condominium. Do you organize social activies for them?
Well, not so
Are you the chaplain here too?
Not here. So not so much that. I was on the board for about 4 years, and then I was the president 1 year. So took a lot of time, a lot of activity. Mm-hmm. And then I've been on committees of one kind or another over the years, which involves quite a bit of work.
Keeping your interest up in what's going on
Keeping
here.
the place going and
right.
Talking about what needs to be done and that kind of thing. So that's been a real big interest of mine.
You also mentioned to me earlier that you had a couple of stepchildren that you wanted to mention too. We want to include them.
That's right.
And they are by name?
That's Jim and Betsy.
So you have two Betsies.
Two Betsies, that's right.
Your cup runneth over, two
that's
Betsies.
Right. Betsy Bulloch and Betsy Wood. Well, Betsy Bulloch is now Betsy Yvonne because she's married. But anyway, they're two wonderful kids. I say kids, gosh, they're both over 40 now. But
they're still your kids.
That's kids.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
And it's been a real meaningful thing to me to have them as part of the extended family. And certainly Mary has brought great things into our lives here too.
That's wonderful. Did your parents live long enough to know about you going to be a priest?
Yes.
So they lived to see you be a priest.
They did.
And knew that. That's a great thing too for them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I
think
have
they
been
were
thrilled
they
about
were pleased about that.
Yeah.
So they did live long enough. That's right. Now let's see, I don't know whether I think we've covered most of me.
We've covered most of you?
Yeah.
I bet we haven't even started to cover you.
Haven't scratched the surface yet.
No, we haven't. We got some highlights here, but I don't think we scratched the surface yet.
Right.
To sum it all up, it's been a happy life.
Very happy.
And it's been a lucky life.
That's right. I've married well twice.
Which is a very fortunate thing.
That's correct.
Very fortunate thing. And you're going to keep on coming to Georgia Tech reunions.
Yes.
And be the chaplain for the old crowd from the fraternity days. When the call is there for one, right?
That's tough. They know me too well.
Do they ask you for funny stories too?
Occasionally.
And do you have an endless source of funny stories?
Well, I don't know whether it's endless, but I have accumulated a few over the years. We better not get into that.
We better not. You don't want my tape to be censored, huh?
Don't want your tape to be censored. The president of Georgia Tech might have a problem. What's his name, Clough?
Clough.
Clough.
Dr. Wayne Clough.
Oh, he pronounced it Clough.
Clough, just like rough.
I haven't met him yet, so I don't know.
Oh, you'll like him a lot.
He's a pretty good fellow.
Rough, yep.
All right.
We think of rough, tough Clough.
Oh, boy.
But he's not. He's a very gentle man, so you'll enjoy meeting him. You'll meet him at the reunion this year.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy life, your summer life yet, when you could be up at the lake.
Well, I had fun.
We had fun. Thank you for sharing you with us.
You're more than welcome.